The sun crept through the gaps of the old lace curtains, casting a fragile glow on the withering petals of the garden I had tried so hard to revive. The leaves were dusty, the flower beds choked with weeds. It seemed the house itself was slowly surrendering to neglect, much like the life I found myself living with my own family. I knelt on the damp earth, hands trembling slightly, pulling stubborn roots from the soil, as I had done countless times before. There was a quiet that wrapped around me, the kind of silence that presses, suffocates, and tastes like forgotten promises. In those moments, as the faint scent of damp earth mingled with fading blooms, memories surfaced like fragile ghosts. I remembered the mornings when laughter echoed through these halls, when my children's voices filled every corner with hope and joy. Those days when Lucas was just a boy chasing dreams beyond his reach, and I held on to every giggle and tear as if they were treasures. Now, the silence was louder than any argument or harsh word ever was. It was the absence, an invisible chasm that had grown with every sacrifice I made, every quiet moment I swallowed to keep the peace. The morning was ordinary in every way, yet beneath the mundane tasks was a heavy chest burdened with invisible wounds. After tending to the garden, I retreated to the small kitchen, where the chipped porcelain cup carried my lukewarm tea, a companion to my thoughts. The walls around me echoed with shadows of the past, as if whispering of days when family was more than just a name. Then the mail arrived, a small envelope among the clutter of bills and advertisements. I extracted a postcard, its glossy image flaunting azure waves and bright sun, a stark contrast to the gray weighing down my heart. Lucas's handwriting on the back was bold, confident, and utterly indifferent. The message was crystal clear, an invitation, or rather an announcement. They were embarking on a lavish vacation. A trip through exclusive resorts and secluded beaches, a family time they intended to enjoy without me. The words landed like stones in my stomach, every sentence a reminder that I was excluded, cast aside, invisible even within my own blood. The postcard's colors blurred as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. They didn't just leave the house empty that day, they left me out of their lives, out of their plans, out of their hearts. Sitting on the worn kitchen chair, the weight in my chest made it hard to breathe. The sting was familiar, like an old wound reopening. Years of silent love and sacrifice seemed reduced to this solitary moment of cruel neglect. The truth was loud and unyielding. I was invisible, deemed irrelevant by those I had given everything for. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, nursing Lucas through fever, the countless dinners prepared with hands worn yet steady, and the quiet encouragement I offered to Clara when she first entered the family. None of it mattered to them now. I didn't cry then. Instead, I let my mind drift to those moments when they laughed in this home, moments when I tried desperately to be both mother and friend. Laughter that once filled these rooms had faded, replaced by silence and doors closing softly but firmly against me. The house, once a sanctuary, felt more like a mausoleum of broken dreams and quiet tears. My reflection in the kitchen window was faint, a woman whose face bore the subtle signs of years slipping away, whose eyes held the pain of countless unspoken words. How had I become a shadow in my own family? It was not a sudden betrayal, but a slow unraveling, each thread of connection severed by greed and indifference. The postcard was only the latest proof that in their eyes I was a relic to be ignored as they moved on with their lives. Their calls no longer came, their visits were rare and perfunctory. And the warmth that should have come with the word family was replaced by cold transactions and calculated smiles. As the afternoon light waned, I moved through the rooms that held memories. Lucas's old bedroom, now empty and silent. The living room where Clara once sipped tea as we talked quietly. Even the faded wallpaper seemed to sag under the weight of abandonment. Each corner reminded me of my invisible place within this home, a mother whose presence was overlooked, whose sacrifices were unspoken and unacknowledged. Yet, beneath the pain, I felt a flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet, but a fragile awareness. The betrayal was real, but so was my endurance. I could feel my heartbeat steadying, the quiet in me growing louder, demanding to be heard. If they thought I was invisible, they had not yet seen what silence could conceal. That evening, as I closed the worn door on the empty house, I allowed myself a moment in the stillness. The tears I had held back finally surfaced, but they were no longer tears of defeat. They were the last echoes of the woman they thought forgotten. In the quiet, a promise formed, not one spoken aloud, but etched deep within my heart. They might have cast me aside, but I had not disappeared. I was still here, watching, waiting, invisible no longer. Night had draped its quiet veil over the house, but inside, the stillness was alive with memories long tucked away. I settled on the edge of my bed, the old quilt beneath my hands rough with the imprint of years gone by. In this sanctuary of shadows, I let my mind drift, searching the recesses where the past lingered, where the story of my silent sacrifice lay folded like a forgotten letter. The family resort, our legacy, or so it was supposed to be, rose clearly in my thoughts. I had been there from the beginning, shaping its edges with careful hands and weary determination. Before Lucas claimed it as his territory, I navigated the labyrinth of finances, soothed tensions between partners, and kept the fragile enterprise afloat. Every evening spent poring over ledgers, every missed dinner, every sleepless night had been a building block beneath their future. Yet those foundations were invisible to them now, unacknowledged and unremembered. I could still hear the whisper of my own voice encouraging Lucas during his restless youth, guiding decisions under quiet breath. I had supported Clara in her early steps into our family, even when her lip curled in impatience at what she deemed my irrelevance. My own hopes and dreams, buried beneath layers of care and duty, had been silenced to make room for theirs. That silence had once felt like loneliness. Now it stirred something else, an ember glowing faint yet steadfast in the depths of my chest. I allowed a slow, steady breath, feeling the ache of betrayal settle beside the urgent pulse of resilience. The postcard from earlier was not just a message, but a confirmation. They had written me out of their story, dismissing me as a relic from a forgotten past. Their calls were distant echoes, their visits landmarks in a map of absence. The warmth I had clung to, the word family, had decayed into cold formalities and empty smiles. Yet here, in the solitude of my room, the truth of my own endurance rose quietly, folding around me like armor. I was no ghost in this house. My roots ran deep, intertwined with its walls and memories. Dawn broke soft and gray through the window, casting muted light on rooms once alive with laughter. I moved among them, the guest room now too neat, the living room where Clara and I had shared teas and secrets, now stale and unwelcoming. The faded wallpaper sagged as if burdened by the weight of all that had passed and all that was ignored. Every step echoed the invisibility I had endured, a mother whose presence was overlooked, whose sacrifices remained unpraised. But beneath the sorrow, beneath the sting of neglect, I felt my heart steady. The quiet inside me was growing louder, a steady thrum of determination rising from the ashes of pain. If they believed I was invisible, they had yet to witness the force that silence could hold. Thoughts of Lucas and Clara sharpened into focus. Lucas, with his ambitions sharp and self-assured, distant from the mother who had tended the roots of his dreams. Clara, radiant and dismissive, treating me like a tired relic. I saw with clarity their arrogance, how their entitlement blinded them to the cracks beneath their lavish surface. They had allowed the resort to slip, payments missed, repairs deferred, as they chased pleasure and luxury. Their neglect was a careless tribute to my absence. I remembered countless nights spent quietly mending financial gaps, negotiating with lenders without recognition or thanks. I alone had kept the delicate balance from tipping toward ruin. They had no notion of the quiet battles I fought to preserve the family's dream. Their struggle was ignorance born of arrogance. Now, those years of silent observation were my secret strength. I had gathered the scattered pieces, noticed the gaps in their stewardship, collected papers and ledgers that whispered truths only I had cared to hear. In the safety of quiet rooms, I collected evidence not to wield as a weapon of rage, but as a foundation of justice. My resolve molded itself from years of deferred ambitions and silent endurance. The justice I sought was not loud or vengeful, it was precise and patient, a reclamation of dignity rather than a dramatic showdown. I understood now that power did not always roar. Sometimes it rose slowly, transforming pain into purpose with steady hands. The burden I carried, years of neglect and invisible love, began to shift. I saw myself not as a victim, but as a force gathering strength in the shadows. The patience that once silenced me was now a tool, shaping a new path forward. I was no longer the faded figure they cast aside. I was a mother awakened, a woman reclaiming her story. As twilight deepened outside, I took solace in the quiet certainty blossoming within. The road ahead would be steep and long, but no longer would I walk it weighed down by silence and invisibility. The papers I had preserved, the knowledge carried in every careful step, were pieces of my future, the foundation of a plan born from patience and quiet strength. I folded those ledgers carefully, placing them back where they would remain hidden until the time was right. My fingers lingered on the edges, a silent promise and a steady assurance that the story was not over. I was ready, not for conflict or confrontation, but for measured action. If they thought I was invisible, they had yet to discover what power the unseen holds. In the stillness of that night, beneath the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, I whispered a vow to myself. I would reclaim not only the legacy they disregarded, but the respect and recognition that had long been denied. Invisible no longer, I was a mother transformed, a quiet force poised to change the course of our family's future. The days that stretched ahead were calm on the surface but purposeful beneath, each one an opportunity to nurture a plan that had taken root in the quiet corners of my soul. The garden outside, once neglected and forlorn, now became a reflection of the order and patience I was cultivating within. As I clipped back wild branches and cleared away the overgrowth, I felt a sense of reclamation stirring, not just of soil and leaves, but of everything the resort, the estate, and my family had come to represent. The resort was more than a business. It was the embodiment of years of sweat, sacrifice, and silent toil. Its grandeur was undeniable. The ocean's endless blue stretched beyond manicured lawns, and its walls whispered of a legacy built with care. Yet beneath its shining surface, the cracks were deep and growing. Lucas and Clara, intoxicated by wealth and careless pleasure, treated the estate as nothing more than a backdrop for their lavish lives. Their priorities were alarmingly clear. Appearances were everything, responsibility nothing. I watched and listened, as I had learned to do over decades of quiet invisibility. Lucas swept through rooms with the air of a man who owned not only assets, but entitlement itself. His calls were brief, his attention fragmented, his gaze distant when it fell upon me. Clara, vibrant and cold, danced through the spaces with practiced charm, leaving little room for anything real or lasting. Every gesture they made spoke of dismissal, of me, and of the work that had sustained them. Their disregard was not just careless. It was a slow erosion of everything I had fought to protect. Bills went unpaid. The once impeccable grounds were patchy with neglect. Maintenance delays became frequent, driving the value and reputation of the resort downward. Their negligence was all the more cruel because it was hidden beneath a veneer of opulence. They lived as though nothing was amiss, while the house and business suffered beneath their feet. I began collecting evidence quietly, Every financial statement, every contract that bore their signatures, or, more crucially, their neglect, became a thread in the tapestry I was weaving. I scoured bank records and invoices, identifying missed payments and irregular account activity. Staff shared guarded whispers about tense moments and delegated tasks ignored. I recorded it all with methodical determination. No detail was too small. Every piece added weight to a story they could no longer hide. The house that had echoed with my quiet sorrow now became my command center, the place where plan and patience forged into action. It was here that I reached out to Joanna, a lawyer I had trusted for many years. Her office, steeped in the scent of leather-bound books and polished wood, was a haven of clarity amid the turmoil. When I arrived, late afternoon light filtered in, casting long shadows that seemed to settle around the piles of documents we laid before her. I did not shed tears. The silent grief lived deeper, settled years ago as I confronted this reality over and over. Instead, I laid out the evidence, watching Joanna's eyes as they flicked across ledger after ledger, notice after notice. Her expression was grave, beyond pity, beyond surprise, a recognition of the deep betrayal woven into numbers and legal obligations. This was worse than any of us had anticipated. Joanna spoke of financial mismanagement, delinquent taxes, and violations of contractual agreements that, left unchecked, could dismantle what the family had built. The weight of reality pressed on me, but with it came a strengthening resolve. We mapped out a strategy grounded in the law and driven by precision, not emotion. Our actions would be deliberate, measured, and designed to restore what had been disregarded without fanfare or spectacle. As she detailed the legal procedures and responsibilities required to assert my rights, I listened intently. Ownership rights, shareholder obligations, fiduciary duties, these legal terms transformed from abstract concepts to weapons of restoration. I absorbed every deadline, every form, every requirement with the focus born of years spent waiting in silence. This was my moment to step into a role denied to me, not as a supplicant or an outsider, but as a rightful guardian of our family's legacy. Leaving Joanna's office with folders bulging and a heart steady with purpose, I slipped back into the cadence of quiet preparation. I made discreet inquiries, reconnected with loyal staff who still held respect for the resort's roots, and confirmed details of unpaid debts and overlooked repairs. My network grew, and so did my quiet influence. Lucas and Clara remained oblivious, blinded by their own indulgence, unaware that the current of change was already gathering. Evenings became times of quiet reassessment. I pored over my growing collection of evidence, cross-referencing and verifying, ensuring every detail was beyond dispute. The weight of my silent vigilance sank deeply into me. It was both an anchor and a beacon. They believed control was theirs by birthright and blind ambition, but power built on neglect was fragile. I thought often of the sacrifices embedded in every corner of the resort, and the years in which I had been the invisible architect of its survival. There was no room for anger or despair in this new chapter, only a calm certainty that justice need not shout to be heard. The strength I had nurtured through silence now surged into resolve. The more I unraveled, the more firmly I stood grounded in the truth that this was not just about property or money. This was about reclaiming respect and dignity robbed by years of neglect. I would be neither harsh nor loud. Instead, I would be relentless and patient, exacting what was owed in a language they could not ignore. In the stillness of the old family home, as twilight deepened and the horizon faded from gold to gray, I felt the profound shift within me. The layers of invisibility that had once cloaked me were beginning to peel away, revealing a woman transformed by endurance, ready to act not from bitterness but from quiet power. The papers I held were more than evidence. They were the foundation of a new beginning. Folding them carefully, I placed them back into their hiding place, a silent fortress guarding the key to my reclamation. Tonight, the house did not feel like a place of resignation, but rather the cradle of a future where I was no longer unseen. Lucas and Clara may have believed they ruled unchallenged, but the mother they disregarded was awakening, steady, resolute, and prepared to rewrite the story that had silenced her for so long. And soon, very soon, the invisible would become impossible to ignore. The plan I had nurtured over countless quiet mornings and restless nights began to take shape with a precision that felt almost poetic. It was a slow unveiling, a dance between patience and power, where every step was measured and deliberate. The inertia that had held me invisible was breaking, replaced by a controlled momentum that no one, not even Lucas or Clara, could anticipate or resist. I started by converting my small holdings in the family's lesser properties into liquid assets, a move designed to empower but not provoke. Those shares were quietly sold, the transactions anonymized to avoid raising the slightest suspicion. Each sum notched into my accounts was a brick in the foundation of my reclamation, a tangible reminder that control was not a gift freely given, but a prize to be earned. Returning home with contracts and legal documents in hand, I spread them across the old oak table where the patterns of my life had been laid bare for years. Ownership was not simply a matter of possession, it was tangled with decades of wills, trusts, and tacit agreements woven into the family's fabric like a secret language only now being decrypted. Joanna, my steadfast and quiet ally, guided me through the labyrinth of laws and clauses with the careful wisdom of someone who had seen justice both denied and delivered. "The law favors the vigilant," she said one afternoon as the amber sunlight filled her office, "but you must be patient. The courts move slowly, but their decisions are lasting." I nodded, knowing that patience was not passive waiting, but an active power, a tool of quiet strength. Every document, every clause, every nuance learned and understood became a weapon in my hands, one sharpened by years of silent observation. At the same time, I cultivated alliances with those who still held the family's best interests close to their hearts. The resort's loyal staff, housekeepers who recalled brighter days, gardeners whose hands knew every root and leaf, accountants who had once been unheard voices warning of impending collapse, became whispered sources of truth. Their quiet reports of unpaid bills, neglected repairs, and deteriorating morale painted a portrait of decay that directly contradicted Lucas and Clara's extravagant facade. In their world, gloss and glamour masked neglect. Their vacations were more photographed than enjoyed, their social events glittering illusions that concealed the cracks beneath. But beneath their bluster, the estate was unraveling. Suppliers grew restless, vendors demanded payment, workers whispered of uncertainty. It was a slow rot, but rot nonetheless. I, who had nurtured this place through decades of unseen effort, was now poised to nurture its resurrection. My daily rhythms became a balance between continued observation and discreet action, ensuring that every piece of neglect was documented and every bill eventually paid, not by them, but by my careful hand. The old family home, the heart of our shared history, became the site of my quiet reclaiming. Packing my belongings was an act both symbolic and grounding. Each item, a faded photograph of Lucas with a crooked smile, a worn novel thick with dog-eared pages, the delicate china passed down through generations, carried stories of love, loss, and endurance. Carefully wrapped, each piece traversed the distance from forgotten spaces to new sanctuaries. This packing was not a retreat, but a rearrangement of my life's pieces, drawing a boundary between a past marked by silence and a future I would shape. It was a reclamation of space and self. Lucas, ever preoccupied with his unchecked ambitions, failed to notice these subtle movements. Clara remained lost in the spectacle of her social circles, oblivious to the undercurrents shifting beneath their feet. Their arrogance cloaked their vision, blinding them to the coming change. The months slipped by, each one another step along the path I had paved with patience and persistence. Investments under my name flowed into the resort's renewal, facilities repaired, staff morale lifted, financial management straightened. Change whispered through corridors once stale, sweeping through grounds once untended. The impact was profound. Staff felt the rebirth, their whispered hope growing. Suppliers returned with open hands, encouraged by renewed respect and payments flowing as promised. The estate breathed with new life, its pulse steady and strong. Lucas and Clara's certainty began to crack. Unexplained invoices paid, workers suddenly smiling, suppliers answering calls with warmth instead of frustration. These small fissures grew into undeniable shifts. Their grip on their perceived dominion loosened with every subtle correction. Their bluster faltered. Yet I refrained from confrontation. Bitter words and loud declarations would only fuel their defensiveness, energize their arrogance. Instead, I wore silence like armor, letting my actions speak in a language of quiet authority. I allowed them the illusions they craved, even as I dismantled those very foundations beneath them. One evening, standing in the lush gardens the morning sun ignited with color, I marveled at the transformation. The flowers bloomed richer, the lawns stretched wider and greener, and the air held the comfort of renewal. This wasn't only a revival of land and buildings, it was the reawakening of a family legacy born from love and sacrifice. I was no longer the invisible mother whose sacrifice was overlooked and unspoken. I was the pulse beneath the visible, the quiet force restoring what had been lost. Control was no longer theirs by unchecked claim, but shared with me as rightful guardian. In this moment, under a sky painted with dusk's soft hues, I felt a peace that had eluded me for years. The layers of invisibility that once cloaked me peeled away to reveal strength forged by endurance and patience. The quiet reclamation was nearly complete. The days of silent suffering had passed. Ahead lay the unveiling, a deliberate, composed revelation of a power earned not by demands, but through steadfast love and resolve. Soon, the invisible would become impossible to ignore. The day they returned from their extravagant vacation carried a weight heavier than the sun that bore down from a cloudless sky. The house, once a silent witness to neglect and absence, seemed to hold its breath as Lucas and Clara arrived. Their presence dripping with the arrogance of assumed ownership. They expected everything to be exactly as they had left it. The gardens wild, the house silent and unoccupied, the power resting unquestioned in their hands. But the world had shifted beneath their feet, quietly, steadily. What they did not know was that I had already been here, weaving a tapestry of change stitched with patience, proof, and purpose. Their irritation simmered beneath thin smiles when their recent calls to me went unanswered. They had assumed I was too frail, too distant, perhaps too broken to engage with the matters that now mattered most. That assumption was the cruelest betrayal, a wound that had long festered beneath my skin, now fueling a fire deep in my chest. As they entered the estate, the first shock was the sight before them. The gardens, once choked with weeds and neglect, burst with color and life. Flowers stood tall, their petals vivid and fresh. Lawns stretched broad and impeccably maintained. Fountains sang melodies that had long been silenced. This was no longer the playground of reckless indulgence. It was a living testament to care and dedication, a world restored not by their hand, but by mine. The staff, once subdued into anonymity, now greeted them with quiet pride and dignity. Their smiles were no longer masks of deference, but genuine expressions of renewed hope and respect. The subtle shift unsettled Lucas and Clara, pricking at the cracks of their long-held certainty. I emerged not with anger or accusations, but with evidence, documents that could not be dismissed, papers that bore my name and the irrefutable proof of my rightful claims. As I laid these before them, one by one, I saw flickers of disbelief take hold. Contracts signed with legal weight, payments made in full, shares redistributed, all marking a shift in ownership they were forced to confront. Lucas's eyes portrayed a tempest of fury and stunned realization. Clara's composed mask cracked, revealing the sharp edges of shock and fear. They were coming to terms with a loss that was not just financial, but foundational, the crumbling of their unchallenged dominion. Around us, silence deepened, filled with the gravity of undeniable change. No apologies came, nor were they expected. Their stunned quiet was an anthem to years of neglect and dismissal, finally answered with justice. I spoke calmly, reminding them of the years cloaked in invisibility, the sacrifices unseen, the love offered without recognition, the strength forged in silence. This was not vengeance, but reckoning, a reclamation of respect long overdue. Lucas struggled to respond, his bravado wavering. Clara's lair burned, fierce yet fraught with unease. They had misjudged the mother they dismissed as invisible. Standing firm, I felt the heavy weight of years of silent heartbreak transmute into resolute power. Unspoken words found voice in my steady presence. Their disbelief gave way slowly to acceptance. The invisible had become visible. The legacy they thought theirs alone was now shared, reclaimed with dignity, patience, and unwavering resolve. As twilight wrapped the estate in gentle hues, I felt the culmination of long-awaited justice settled deep within. The foundation had shifted, and a new story began, one of strength, redemption, and undeniable presence. In that quiet moment, I realized my true victory, not the restored gardens or signed papers, but that I had become the heartbeat beneath the visible, the force behind the unseen. No longer invisible, I was the mother they had tried to erase, transformed and unbreakable, ready to shape the future on my own terms. The days that followed the unveiling were quieter, yet filled with a depth that only time can temper. The storm had passed, leaving a stillness that carried the weight of a profound transformation. Lucas and Clara withdrew into their own worlds, their bluster and demands softened into uncertain murmurs and reluctant distances. They had once ruled this estate with the certainty of heirs apparent, claiming the house, the land, the legacy itself as a birthright. But that certainty had fractured, dissolving into the fading light of a chapter they no longer commanded. I walked through the gardens one early morning, the mist clinging gently to the vibrant blooms and the fresh earth. The scent of damp soil, intertwined with the softness of sunlit petals, was a balm to a soul long burdened by silent sorrow. These flowers were no longer tokens of neglect, but symbols of nurture and renewal, their colors brilliant and unapologetic, much like the reclamation I had quietly wrought. This home, once a mausoleum of broken dreams, unspoken sacrifices, and forgotten tears, now embraced me not with cold shadows, but with light and warmth. It was not just a place to dwell, it was a sanctuary of victory, a fortress built from resilience and love spent quietly over decades. I was no longer marginalized, a ghost flickering at the edges of family portraits, but a presence fully realized, an anchor grounded firmly in ownership and purpose. Inside, the room seemed to breathe anew. Walls that had borne silent witness to years of invisibility now echoed softly with the determination of a new beginning. Every corner, every familiar object whispered stories not just of what had been lost, but of what had been reclaimed. The faded wallpaper and worn furnishings held a dignity restored, reflections of a mother reborn through patience and quiet strength. Evenings became moments of reflection, sitting by the window as twilight deepened and the world hushed into peace. I watched the fading light transform the estate, softening edges and illuminating pathways once hidden by shadow. In these moments, I allowed myself the luxury of thinking freely, untangled from the chains of neglect and invisibility. Years of unseen heartache and unacknowledged effort weighed heavily, but in them also lay the seeds of an unbreakable resolve. Justice, I knew now, was not vengeance. It was balance, a restoration of respect and dignity so long denied. The strength I had forged in silence was no loud roar, but a steady pulse, a quiet rhythm that demanded to be heard, not with shouts, but with a presence so profound it could not be ignored. As I looked to the horizon, I embraced the freedom that ownership promised. It was not just the keys to a property, but the keys to a new life, a life where I was valued, where my sacrifices mattered, and where my voice could no longer be silenced. The burdens of the past, heavy as they had been, now felt lighter, lifted by the promise of tomorrow. Though Lucas and Clara retreated, their absence lessened the weight on this home. Their retreat was an opening, a clearing of space where I could nurture the legacy with steady hands and an open heart. The fractures caused by years of neglect and betrayal could now begin to heal, reshaped by the enduring love and unshakable strength of a mother transformed. I found myself walking taller, moving with a confidence born not of arrogance, but of earned resilience. From the shadows where I once lingered unseen, I stepped fully into the light. The invisible mother had become the unshakable force beneath the visible, an unseen power finally acknowledged. And in the stillness of this new chapter, I discovered a peace that had long eluded me. The pain of years past was no longer a chain, but a foundation, solid, enduring, and filled with quiet hope. I was ready to write the next pages of this story, no longer as a footnote, but as the author of my own destiny. The invisible had risen, and I was forever changed.